Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. I hope you guys are ready for today's true crime case because it is a wild one. Now, if you're brand new here, welcome to the channel. I hope you appreciate the case coverage. And if you are a returning 10 to Lifer, welcome back. I am so happy to have you guys here with me. I hope you are all getting ready for CrimeCon and all of the things. I will be in Nashville for CrimeCon. I'm hoping to meet so many of you guys. But yeah, it should be a good time. I'm excited to see all the professionals in the industry. I'm excited to meet people. I'm excited to meet all the other creators. So yeah, let me know if you're going. But anyways, let's talk about today's case because I feel like we've talked about some really crazy cases throughout the years. And a lot of times it's about apprehending a suspect, piecing that evidence together, and then of course, hopefully bringing some justice to the situation, right? But so much of that really depends on what people remember and whether what they say they remember is even reliable, even if they're trying to be honest and trying to be truthful. Now, I don't know about you, but I can barely remember what I even had for dinner last week. So if you sat me down in an interrogation room and asked me to talk about how I spent, last Tuesday, I guarantee that I would probably contradict myself at one point or another. So how can you really tell the difference between someone who's misremembering or somebody who's lying to cover up their own guilt? If someone keeps changing their story, how can you tell if they're forgetful or a master manipulator? So that's what we're dealing with in today's case. So put on your comfy socks, grab your snack, grab your drink, and let's get right into it. All right, guys, say it with me. Debt is hard. I feel like getting in debt is so easy, but getting out, it seems like the system is set up so that we don't. And the anxiety of it all, the stress, it can be absolutely devastating and soul-crushing. I get all of that. I've been there. And I'm here to say you don't have to go at it alone. There is a way out and help is available, thanks to today's sponsor, PDS Debt. PDS Debt has customized options for anybody who is struggling with credit cards, personal loans, collections, or even medical bills. They truly care about getting you out of debt. PDS Debt rolls all of your monthly payments into one low, interest-free monthly payment. So if it ever feels like you're making payments every month on your debt, but your balances aren't going down, this program is definitely for you. Everyone with $10,000 or more in eligible debt qualifies, and there is no minimum credit score required. Bad and fair credit is accepted. PDS Debt is also a top-rated company on Google, and they have an A+ rating on the Better Business Bureau. So save thousands in interest and fees and pay off your debt in a fraction of the time. And PDS Debt is offering a free debt analysis to our viewers. It only takes 30 seconds. Head to pdsdebt.com/10tolife to get your free debt assessment today. Greg and Michele Williams seemingly lived the perfect life, a life that was envied by people who knew them. Greg was 40 years old, Michele was 42 years old, and together they made a really attractive couple. Greg had piercing blue eyes and Michele had beautiful brown hair. They lived in this massive, beautiful 5,000 square foot home in Keller, Texas, which is a pretty well-off suburb of Fort Worth, and it actually ranks 45th in a list of the 100 safest cities in America. Michele stayed at home with their 4-year-old daughter Michele, while Greg was in the workforce. He was a successful, self-made IT entrepreneur. The two of them lived a life of luxury, and they seemed really happy with each other. They each had a Mercedes-Benz sitting side by side in their garage, and it was actually their joint anniversary gift. They also hosted these massive pool parties in their backyard, and they really just knew how to have a good time. They were such a fun couple to be around. If no one knew any better, they would have thought that Greg and Michele had been married forever. But actually, they had only been married for 4 years, and each of them had 2 other previous marriages. Michele had 2 older sons and a daughter that she brought into the marriage, and Greg had a 14-year-old daughter named Taylor, who he was very close with. In fact, he was a really devoted dad to both Taylor and Michele. Now, besides the fact that Michele had been married 2 other times, she also had a bit of a wild past, and it was rocky enough that you could even argue that Greg saved her from some bad decisions that she had made in her youth. You see, Michele had her first baby at 17 years old, and then by 24, she had 1 marriage under her belt and 2 more children. She went on to find another husband, but that marriage didn't last long, and the reasoning for that is kind of uncertain. If you were to ask Michele, she would tell you that her marriages and any other intimate relationship she had always ended because the guy ended up cheating on her. But if you were to ask anybody else in her life, including her own flesh and blood, the answer more likely than not was that it was actually Michele who did the cheating. And with a little bit of a rocky life, to make ends meet, Michele would do what it took to get by, including taking jobs as a stripper. Her own son has even gone on to say that he believes that Michele was possibly a sex worker at certain times during his childhood. So when Greg and Michele actually met, it was online in a BDSM chat room back in 2007. And then their first in-person meetup was at a local swingers club. Greg had brought his brother Michael to tag along, and maybe it was because they were at a swingers club, or maybe it was because Michele just didn't care much about first impressions, I don't know, but she literally, right there in front of everybody, started to physically grind, physically please Greg, if you catch my drift. Now, it's not clear exactly what she did, guys, but use your imagination. And you could probably say, well, hey, they were at a swingers club. That's what people do. But, even so, that's pretty bold to do right out there in the open in front of the guy's brother. At least maybe get a room or go off into a dark corner. I don't know. Not shaming, just saying. Now, normally you'd think that an encounter like that would be a one-time kind of affair, or just maybe a hookup. But it actually ended up being quite the opposite. Greg very quickly became infatuated with Michele, and she felt the same. It also didn't hurt that Greg was a good guy who provided a lot of stability that Michele hadn't been able to find up until that point. So safe to say, when Michele finally had this nice man who had an amazing job, she was gonna do what she had to do in order to keep him. And he was so nice that when Michele really wanted to even own her own frozen yogurt place, he actually bought it for her. The yogurt shop was called Blueberries. By October 2011, things seemed to be going just amazingly well for the couple. Even though they already had this big, beautiful house, they were upgrading, and they were getting ready to close on an all-new dream home, including plans for a brand new pool for their lavish parties and for their little daughter Michele to swim in. Like I said, everything seemed to be going perfectly. That was until 4:40 a.m. on Thursday, October 13th, 2011.
Netcom 911, where is the emergency? Oh my God, where are you, ma'am? You don't know where you are? Take a deep breath. What happened? What happened, ma'am? Somebody what? Ma'am, I can't understand you. Can you take a deep breath and tell me what's going on? I'm at 1410 Jacob Avenue. 1410 Jacob Avenue? What's going on? My husband was shot. Somebody was in the house. Your husband what? Bleeding really bad. He was shot in the head. Your husband was shot in the head? Okay, can you walk out front for me? What's your name? Can you walk out front of the house at 1410 Jacob Avenue for me? I've got officers that are going to come talk to you, okay? I need an ambulance. We've got an ambulance coming to you as well, okay? I should take my baby. Oh my God. Try to get a location of the office and did this happen in the house? Yes, it happened in the room in the bed. It happened in the bed? Did he do it to himself? No. No? My night door is open. My little girl's on the couch. Who did it? I don't know. I got hit really hard. You were hit in the head? Where's your daughter now? She's on the couch. She's asleep. She's asleep on the couch? How old is she? She's 4. You don't know who it was that hit you? No. Okay, do you know what they look like? If they're male or female? Oh my God. Did you hear anything?
I heard something, so I got up to check on the baby on the couch. And I got him hit upside the head.
Do you know what hit you in the head?
I don't know.
Do you know if anybody's still in the house with you? Did they run away?
Yeah, he went out the bedroom door.
They ran out the bedroom door? Do you know if they were male or female? It was a male? Do you know anybody that would try and get into your house?
No.
Okay, what's your name, ma'am? Michelle? Michelle, do you know how many people were in the house?
I don't know one person for a second.
You just saw one person for a second? Can you go out front?
I know. Oh, God. Oh, God.
Michelle, can you go out front?
I am.
You're out front? Michelle, when they're on their way, ma'am. They're on their way to you, okay?
Right here in the corner here.
Do you see an officer?
Yes.
Okay, can you talk to the officer?
Where you see whichever's closest. Wow.
What makes you think somebody was in the house? So they started doing Oh, you did see somebody. Somebody was there.
Yeah, I was
Where did they come in? Where's your daughter?
Okay, that was crazy, right? I mean, Michele claimed that she had been fast asleep on the couch with Michele that night, and then some type of loud crash sound woke her up. Luckily, Michele was unfazed, and none of the other kids lived with them, but Michele decided to go to her room to check on Greg. She claimed that when she rounded the corner to the bedroom, a man smashed her in the face with something hard enough to knock her unconscious for a moment. When she woke up, she rushed to the bedside, and only to find Greg there, dead. He had been shot in the head, and that is when she called 911. So the whole thing was pretty shocking and rather strange, being that they lived in a really safe area and inside a gated community. But that wasn't the only strange thing about the crime scene that was discovered. When the police arrived, they found Michele waiting hysterically on the porch, talking on her phone. She told police that Michele was still asleep on the couch inside, and that the intruder must have left through the back door. Which, I don't know about you, but if an intruder was just in my house, I certainly would not leave my child sleeping on the couch while I was just outside on the phone talking to somebody. So when the cops went inside, they went in under the assumption that the intruder might actually still be hiding inside, even though Michele had told them that the person had left. And when they went into the bedroom where Greg was, they found him underneath the bed covers. There was blood on the floor and also on his head. Now, something else really obvious right away was that the TV in Greg and Michele's bedroom was blasting, and it was so loud that the officers didn't even try talking to each other inside the bedroom, because there was no chance that they would actually hear one another. But the police continued to look around, and they found a ton of strange clues about who could have been Greg's killer. For one, there was no sign that anybody broke into the home. Minus the door from the living room to the yard being slightly open, there was also no sign of forced entry at all. And nothing had been taken from the home either, including $20,000 in cash that they kept there on hand. Which, I don't know about you guys, but that seems like a lot of cash to also keep on hand, but to each their own. Now, on top of all of that, the gun found next to the bed was Greg's own .45 caliber handgun. Next to his gun was a silver wrench, presumably the tool that was used to sock Michele in the cheek, knocking her out cold. Other than having a bruise on her face, though, Michele was actually pretty put together. Her hair was done, she was fully dressed, which was kind of weird since it was in the middle of the night. But at the same time, she did fall asleep on the couch, so that could answer that. She also apparently wasn't shedding any tears, though, but she was screaming. Meanwhile, her daughter Michele was still asleep the entire time on the couch. Once she was woken up, she and Michele walked down the road to an ambulance that was waiting for them. Michele then took an ice pack and she used it for her cheek. And if you thought that everything so far was a little bit odd and maybe out of the ordinary for a scene like this, investigators also realized that the entire crime scene had been wiped down with cleaning products. And I'm talking counters, the gun, pretty much anything that would have been touched. There was virtually no DNA evidence found, making things, of course, that much harder. And it's crazy, less than 12 hours before Greg was found dead, things were looking really good and really normal for the family. Greg's daughter Taylor had a choir concert that he took Michele and Michele to. Afterwards, they went to Taco Bueno to grab a bite to eat before going home for the night. And then Greg and Michele stayed up late chatting about the new house that they were about to close on. Although, I do have to ask, if they were staying up late talking, not fighting, why did Michele sleep on the couch? Now let's go back to the crime scene. Canines were called in to see if they could pick up on the scent of an intruder, but they weren't able to find anything. The gated community had surveillance cameras that recorded who was coming in and out of the neighborhood, but after looking at the footage, other than a newspaper delivery person, there was nobody questionable who came into the area at the time of the murder. So an officer started to process the crime scene, fully believing that somebody broke into the home and shot Greg. But like the other officers had found, he didn't see any signs of a break-in. One thing he did find, though, was a flathead screwdriver, and it was on the ground in the yard, not too far from a back door near the master bedroom. And on the outside of the back door, there were also scratch marks that looked to be from some sort of tool. A Clorox wipe container was also discovered, and then they took it back for processing, being that the crime scene, of course, had been wiped clean. Maybe whoever wiped it clean had owned this container. However, the wipes that had been used to wipe down the scene were nowhere to be found. So police went and they spoke with all of the neighbors, trying to find out if anybody in the neighborhood had seen anyone or seen anything suspicious that night, but nobody in the area said that they saw anything. After the crime scene had been investigated, Greg's body was transferred to the county medical examiner's office. But not in a typical way that a body is usually transferred. I mean, normally you would see the body in a body bag or maybe a white sheet draped over a stretcher. But Greg had been wrapped up in that colorful bedding that he was found in, and then he was transferred into the car that way. Now, I would show you the picture, but due to the rules of YouTube, I can't. But either way, it was very strange, like everything else about this scene at this point. And it also went to show how the police department's experience with this kind of thing was a little bit lacking. They weren't really going across normal protocol that we see. So then the police brought Michele back to the police department to interview her about what had happened that night. They had her change her clothes so that the clothes that she had on could be processed for DNA evidence. Her hands were swabbed as well in case there might be gunpowder residue on them. And little did Michele know, she was about to receive some very, very unfortunate news. Her story was not adding up. The officer interrogating her basically said, look, there are two possible scenarios for what happened, and neither one of them involved an intruder.
Either his is self-inflicted and you covered it up, or there's potential that you may have been involved.
I did not hurt my husband, and he did not hurt himself.
Okay.
There was a man in my house.
Again, all I have is what I have. That's all I could say one of the two things would happen. One of those two things, Michele.
I did not.
Okay. And again,
you won't find that out because I didn't do anything to my husband.
okay.
Now, this whole thing went on for a while, but Michele was sticking to her story. She was innocent, but the detective was not letting things go, and his persistence finally made Michele change course.
Huh?
He did. So bad. I couldn't let her know this.
Her full statement was,
I went to sleep at 1 a.m. and Greg was still awake. He just took at least 3 Tylenol PM. About 3 a.m., Michele came to our room. I got up and laid down on the couch with her. Greg was still awake. I asked him if he needed anything, and he said, just to be left alone. I don't feel good. I fell asleep on the couch with Michele and was awakened by a gunshot sound after 4 a.m. I ran to the bedroom and saw Greg had shot himself in the head. I panicked and wanted to protect Michele from ever knowing her daddy killed himself and started to clean things up. First, I wiped his right hand with Clorox, wipes and dried it with a blanket and toilet paper, then wiped the gun with the blanket and toilet paper and moved the gun to the floor by the back door, opened the back door and called 911, hoping to save his life and make it appear as a burglary. Then I went to the laundry room, got a screwdriver, and pried a little on the back door by my office and left it ajar. Then I grabbed the wrench, which was in the laundry room, and hit my right cheek to bruise it so it would appear as if I startled the burglar. I dropped it by the door in the bedroom and tossed the screwdriver out the door by the woodpile. I flushed all the toilet paper and Clorox wipes down the toilet. This entire time, Michele was still asleep. I didn't want his children to ever know he killed himself.
So yeah, that was the news story here. Greg ended his own life, and Michele didn't have the heart to tell her daughter Michele. Michele was let out of the interrogation room after nearly a 5-hour interview, and she was free to go home for the time being, so she left with a friend. But she was still the main suspect in the police's eyes. Later that afternoon, she decided to go to her sister Laura's house. Now, Michele was kind of upset, but her emotions would come and go, and they weren't super convincing to her sister Laura. Michele ended up spending the night at her sister's house, and then the following morning she got herself all dolled up, and she told Laura that she was starving, and she wanted to go to IHOP, which kind of just strikes me as odd, your husband just died, but you're starving and you're wanting to go to IHOP. Not exactly the picture of a newly grieving widow. And it didn't stop there either. After getting chock full of pancakes for the day, Michele ended up visiting her attorneys, and she wrote them a check for $18,000 out of a business account that was Greg's. And if you're thinking, okay, well, maybe that's a little bit odd, but maybe she's just planning for the funeral, and maybe she's just, grieving in her own way. No. In fact, Michele actually didn't plan or attend Greg's funeral. Instead, she went on a road trip in none other than Greg's car to Great Wolf Lodge in Grapevine, Texas. She went there with all of her kids, which, let me just say, she had a Mercedes too, so why'd she take his? Well, in any event, after her refreshing reset vacation, she went Halloween costume shopping for herself, she went to different sports bars to eat and drink, and she just didn't seem like she was really acting as though she was grieving. But sure, everybody grieves differently, I suppose. But then Michele took that yogurt shop Blueberries and she sold it to somebody on Craigslist, of all places, and she sold it for a whopping $50,000. And she didn't stop there. She made an additional $8,000 after she sold Greg's client list, the client list that he had worked so hard to accumulate while he grew his business. So you would almost think that in these moments, Michele was like living her best life, all while making some money and cash on the side. And if you think about it, Michele did quite a lot over the course of just a few weeks. I feel like she accomplished more than most people do in that amount of time, never mind the fact that she was doing it all while her husband had just been found dead. But I suppose nothing good lasts forever, right? Because on November 3rd, 2011, Greg's autopsy painted a very different picture of how Greg died. According to the medical examiner, Greg didn't shoot himself. Somebody else did. Now, Greg had a pretty hefty dose of sleeping pills that were found in his system, particularly a specific sedative that is found in sleeping pills. The report also found that he had been shot by something between 12 and 18 inches away, making a self-inflicted gunshot wound pretty unlikely. Sure, it's possible, but it feels like a really awkward way to shoot yourself, right? I mean, why would you hold it so far away and risk that it wouldn't work? So it makes you wonder if maybe Michele had also been given that same sedative so that she could sleep through all of that chaos. I mean, I get that some 4-year-olds can be pretty heavy sleepers, but all of this was happening not very far from where she was sleeping. Unfortunately, there was no way to ever test her because too much time had passed at this point, but the question certainly was raised. So after gathering the evidence needed, police now arrested Michele. This was on January 9th, 2012. Now, I think it's pretty safe to say that she was not expecting to be arrested, because they arrested her as she was going into a fitness class. Anyway, she was arrested under the charges of tampering with evidence, making a false police report, and for the murder of Greg. And her bond was set at a little over $500,000. Now, somehow, Michele was able to finagle her way out of the $500,000, and she got it down to $85,000, and she paid it. So, after a week in jail, she put back on those workout clothes that she had been arrested in, and she marched her way out of jail. All with a new fashion accessory in tow, mind you, a GPS ankle monitoring bracelet. And Kenneth Wincorn, that same attorney that she had written that super fat check to the day after Greg's murder, he was right by her side as she went home. Now, the thing about Kenneth was that by many people's standards, him serving as Michele's lawyer was a huge conflict of interest because he knew Greg before the murder. In 2003, he was the attorney for Greg in his ex-wife Kathy's divorce. In fact, he had dealt with Greg in even more recent years as well, like 2008, when it came to a custody agreement that Greg had with Kathy over their daughter Taylor. So when Kathy got wind of the fact that Michele was using Kenneth, she was less than thrilled, publicly stating that money she paid him was part of Greg's estate, and it never should have gone to pay the legal bills of the woman accused of his murder. The fact that he first represented Greg makes it almost unbelievable. But Kenneth said that he didn't really deal with Greg on a personal level, and that it was the firm that he worked for that was involved in Greg and Kathy's divorce back in 2003, not him alone. He said yes, he also had a professional relationship with Greg, but it was only for business, as he was one of the clients of Greg's company, DFW IT Pro. Now, whatever Michele's plan with Kenneth was, it wasn't clear. One thing that was clear is that Michele was trying to cash out on Greg's death every single chance that she could. After she was released, she went to go claim the $150,000 life insurance policy that Greg had. And interestingly enough, it was a policy that was taken out 2 months before Greg died. But according to Michele, he had ended his own life, right? So, what did she do? Well, in the spot where she was supposed to write Greg's cause of death, she wrote homicide. The insurance worker who was supposed to look over the claim thought that things seemed a bit off, and I'm sure anytime homicide is listed, that probably does need to be looked into further. And thanks to a simple online search, it really didn't take long to realize who Michele was, and that Greg's death was also still being investigated. So the police were called, and that was the end of Michele's get-rich-quick scheme in terms of that. And you would think that by that point, Michele would be, maybe trying to stay on the straight and narrow and avoid any attention. And in some ways, you could say she kind of did that. She kind of completely changed her identity in more ways than one. Michele ended up changing her name to Shelley Williams. And shortly after the name change, she also found a new man. But he actually wasn't all that new, because she started dating a 27-year-old man named Gene Wallace. Now, Gene was a friend of one of her sons that she had known for many, many years, and that whole relationship did not go over well with Michele's son, Lee. Gene pretty much said to him one night, like, hey, yeah, I'm thinking of sleeping with your mom, just so you know, which I can't imagine that going over well with anybody. But now that she was moving on with her life, she decided she wasn't going to fall back on the usual ways that she had used to make money before Greg. Now she had some money from selling his business, his client list, and she decided to become a fitness connoisseur. Now, Gene apparently loved fitness too, because the two of them teamed up and started a kettlebell fitness company not too far from where they lived in Texas.
Kettlebell workouts have been around since 1704. The Russian military actually started with it to strengthen their guys. It's used for lots of sports-specific workouts. I'm a personal trainer, and I've been teaching kettlebell with other routines, and I decided to pull it completely out of the gym and put together a 30-minute workout that's very intense, cardio, strength building, and lots of fun. It's very upbeat, it's fast, everyone really has a good time with it, and you get the same amount of results that you would in the gym in half the amount of time.
You're in a group atmosphere, so it pushes you more than you can push yourself, especially with the type of instruction that you get from Shelley.
Now, mind you, this was all just a couple of months after Greg's death. All the while she was wearing these baggier pants to cover up her ankle monitor. Now, for whatever reason, even though the town she was working in was only 20 minutes away, nobody was really putting two and two together that this new person, Shelley, was really Michele. So yeah, she was kind of basically living her best life, all while she was awaiting trial. She had a new man, a growing fitness career, and she was living a double life. Because this whole time she also had to attend different court dates as the trial was coming together. So it's like she was Shelley by day, Michele by night. It was very bizarre. And while she was going to the court hearings as Michele, she tried to maintain a certain image, but not in the way that you would think. She would dress more in a way of what you would think if you were heading out to a club. And she didn't show even the slightest bit of sadness over what was going on. One of Greg's friends, Rob Conover, went to a bunch of Michele's court hearings as well in support of Greg. And he felt that Michele was manipulating the officers, saying when Michele went to leave, she would ask a group of police officers to escort her out. She knew how to twist people. She knew how to get these cops to see her as an innocent woman who needed protection. And Michele continued to live out her life pretty carefree as this new Shelley persona. It's as if she knew that she didn't have much to worry about, and in some ways that was true. The prosecutors were nervous that they didn't have enough evidence to fully connect Michele to Greg's death. Yes, she was the last one with him. Yes, she admitted to cleaning the crime scene before calling the police. But was that enough? The truth was, since there was no DNA evidence at the scene and no gunpowder residue on Michele's hands, there actually was very little to fully prove that she was the one who pulled the trigger. Was she acting shady? Yes. But as we know, you need that smoking gun to convict somebody of murder. Because of all of those missing factors in the case, Michele ended up being offered a plea deal on October 9th, 2013. The plea deal was for deadly conduct, which means wielding a weapon irresponsibly, and it's a third-degree felony in Texas and also a few other states. It meant that she would also be agreeing to a charge of tampering with evidence. Accepting the deal meant that she wouldn't be charged with Greg's murder, though, and instead of life in prison, she would probably only spend up to 18 years in prison. So Michele accepted the deal and pleaded guilty. But as she did, she dropped another major bombshell. She let everybody know she was pregnant with twins. The news caused quite a stir, and it made some question if the relationship between Michele and Gene had actually been going on for way longer than she alleged. And maybe that could have been the reason behind a falling out between Greg and Michele. Maybe that was the motive. One of Greg's ex-wives, Kathy, was one of the people who thought that that was the case, and she said if Greg found out that she was sleeping with her little boyfriend, he would have left her, and she would have gotten nothing. Greg would put up with a lot, but he would not put up with cheating. So, were Greg and Gene having an affair for years? It was hard to say for sure. But either way, the DA took pity on Michele's situation and agreed to wait to have her sentencing hearing until after the babies were born that April in 2014. However, by January 30th, 2014, at Michele's status hearing, she told the judge that she was no longer pregnant. According to Kenneth, her attorney, Michele apparently had a miscarriage around Christmas that year. However, there was no real proof to determine if Michele was actually ever even pregnant, or if that was just a stall tactic that she had used. And according to those who knew her well, it wasn't the first time that Michele had pulled a stunt like this. She was kind of known for faking pregnancies and miscarriages. So Michele's sentencing happened on February 10th, 2014, but then yet another surprising twist happened.
Your Honor, I am not guilty, and I can't sit here and answer the questions the way everybody wants me to because I don't know how to answer.
if this story's true, this lady needs a trial. If this lady is a drama queen, no disrespect intended, and wants attention to impress the parole board, feel like a victim, increase her self-esteem, get media attention, so be it, life goes on.
So that was that. Michele just could not keep her story straight, and the judge was not having it, so he called her entire plea deal off. The new murder trial started that September in 2014, and wouldn't you know it, Michele had changed her story yet again, which, are we even surprised at this point? She went back and told her attorney Kenneth that Greg really did kill himself. However, that didn't stop the media from referring to Michele as the Black Widow. When it came time for opening statements, the prosecution team went first. DA Jack Strickland said that the bruise that Michele had on her face actually came from Greg during a fight that the two of them were having over money. And there might have been some truth to that, because even though the two outwardly seemed like they were a very wealthy couple, they actually had some real money problems. The mortgage lender said that a Capital One account that had been used to get the loan for their new house was wrong. The couple said that they had an average balance of nearly $150,000, but their actual amount was $10,000. Apparently, they altered the numbers, otherwise known as fraud, but it hadn't initially been noticed by the lender. So the DA gave the jury one reason as to why the murder happened, stating the motive was money. Tried and true, age-old money, greed. In other words, Michele killed Greg to get the insurance money because their financial situation was so bad and she didn't want to go under. But the defense team had a different theory for what had happened. They said Greg had taken his own life. Michele's defense attorney, Clay Graham, discussed how Greg could be pretty unstable at times, and also how he used steroids. He also said that Greg was depressed in general, and he was dealing with some sudden losses in his family. Clay said that because of the financial benefit that Greg provided Michele, there was no reason for her to kill him, because he was worth more to her alive than dead. As for why Michele cleaned up the crime scene and staged it as a murder, well, according to Clay, it was due to her maturity. Stating to the jury, Michele reacted to what she was faced with, and she did what any mature mother would do. She moved to protect her child from the sight of her father and the question of why. She acted to protect her child because she couldn't protect Greg from himself. Now, when it was time for the witnesses, the prosecution team called one witness who was pretty surprising, Michele's own son, Andrew. And what he had to say was pretty shocking, to say the least.
She said, call some friends, tell them to pick up an extra large sweater, go somewhere and fire a pistol so that the gunpowder residue would get onto the sweater, break into Kathy's car, hide the sweater under a seat, and go to a payphone and call 911 and leave an anonymous tip so that cops would search her car and find the sweater.
Crazy, right? What did Kathy ever do to her, and why would she want to involve her own son? Apparently, this all went down a few weeks after Greg died. Andrew and his brother, along with their sister's boyfriend, all tried to help Michele out by volunteering to clean up the blood on the master bedroom carpet. That's when Michele pulled Andrew away from the cleaning and asked him to get some friends together so they could frame Kathy. Andrew said that he was in disbelief that his mom asked him to do something so heinous, but he truly thought that she was having some sort of mental breakdown and would eventually come to her senses. When Andrew was questioned about why he waited so long to tell the authorities this, he said, "When you're asked that question by your own mother, it's really hard to know what to do." Andrew also said that about a week after Michele had asked him to do it, after he hadn't done anything, she told him to forget about it, and that she was going to just take matters into her own hands. Michele said that she purchased 2 of the same sweaters at Walmart, one in her size and one in Kathy's size, telling Andrew that by getting herself a sweater, it allowed her to grab the sweater intended for Kathy without leaving any DNA traces on it. Andrew mentioned that his brother Lee, Michele's other son, had gotten into a fight with Michele before the murder, and at one point Michele asked Andrew if he thought that Lee was the intruder who killed Greg. Now by then, Andrew really thought that his own mom might be trying to shift the blame onto Lee. So Andrew said, "We had heard so many stories. That first year after Greg died was such a blur." And he wasn't kidding. Michele would tell her sons that maybe it was a home invasion, or maybe Greg did end his own life. She told them she was afraid and would ask them to stand guard outside of the house. But she also said that Greg had been acting weird for a few days before his death, and that she even found the cars warming up in the garage with the garage door shut, insinuating that Greg was possibly trying to end his life then. So Andrew said it was a roller coaster of emotions. Some days she would be crying hard, other days she'd be laughing. Andrew said that the day after Greg died, he found out about everything from Michele. and she had told him that she had to make up this story just so that the police would let her out of the interrogation room. The next witness that the prosecution team brought onto the stand was Greg's mother, Betty. She got very emotional speaking about her son, and she furthered the prosecution team's goal in showing that Greg would not have ended his own life by saying he wanted to retire early so that he could travel with his family. He had a plan. He wanted to retire at 45 so he could be devoted to his family. She talked about how Greg was no stranger to the concept of somebody ending their own life either, and he actually had very strong feelings about it, because his brother-in-law, Bryn, had taken his life the year before, and he and Greg had been very close. In fact, when Greg spoke about it, he would say that the way his brother-in-law died was the chicken way to go out, and Betty said that his death had really affected Greg. She also discussed how Michele was acting really odd after the murder, which at this point we already know, but Betty said that Michele never once even reached out to her after Greg died so that she could let her know what had happened. A lot of what the prosecution team tried to do was focus on the fact that the marriage really had a lot of financial stress on it. Greg did make great money, $800,000 the year that he died, but Michele's spending was so out of hand that the couple was struggling to come up with a down payment for their new home. All they actually had combined was $28,000. A big piece of evidence that the prosecution team used was an interview that Michele had done earlier that year with 48 Hours.
She did an interview with 48 Hours.
Did you murder your husband, Greg?
No, I did not.
In the interview, she continued to change her story yet again, saying that she might have known possibly who the intruder was and that it could have been somebody in the family. But she changed her story a ton just in that one interview, and she had a bunch of theories. At one point, she said that Greg wanted her to be a dominant and for him to be submissive at home because of how dominant he was in the workforce, and that because of his personality outside of the home, whoever killed him was probably jealous of him. She said that the lack of evidence when it came to the intruder story was all because the police didn't do a good job of gathering it. But she couldn't explain why the intruder used Greg's own gun to kill him, the one that he kept under his nightstand. According to Michele, the intruder came into the house with his own gun, so why didn't the intruder just use that gun instead? During closing arguments, the defense was actually cut off at one point.
He's lost his best friend to suicide. He lost his grandmother that it was his refuge in his childhood when he started making bad decisions. He's looking on his laptop at his bank statements, and he knows that he can't do this, and he
Judge, I'm going to object. This is all totally outside the record.
Sustained.
Thank you. Can I have an instruction that the jury disregard this entire narrative about what was going through Greg's mind?
Jury will disregard the last statements.
Essentially, Clay was making a lot of assumptions about what Greg might have been thinking. But the fact was, there was no evidence that Greg was stressed out at all that night. The prosecution said that the fact of the matter was that Michele was a cold-blooded killer, and she continued to lie about it time and time again. So after 7 hours, stretched over 2 days, the jury came to a decision regarding the fate of Michele.
Mr. Presiding Juror, it is my understanding the jury has reached a verdict. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Williams, if you would stand, please. The verdict in cause number 1266846D says we, the jury, find the defendant, Michele Marie Williams, guilty of the offense of murder.
Michele was sentenced to 60 years in prison, as well as a concurrent sentence of 10 years for tampering with evidence. She will be eligible for parole at the age of 74 after 30 years. But in another bizarre twist of events, Michele's sister-in-law, also named Michele, accused her of murdering her husband Bryn in 2010. Now remember, Bryn's death was ruled a suicide, but his wife thought that Michele was the real culprit. The theory goes like this. Bryn worked for Greg, and he knew how Michele was running through Greg's money. Michele would sometimes give him directions on where to go for different job-related things, so when Bryn was found dead in the company truck parked next to a watchtower on Highway 34, it raised some questions. Once Bryn's wife Michele realized what her sister-in-law was capable of, she thought that she must have lured him out there in order to cover up the financial problems. And there was a strange detail about Bryn's death, conflicting reports on where the gunshot wound was. The police report said that the gunshot wound to his right eye was shot with his right hand, but being that Bryn was left-handed, it didn't make much sense. Then the medical examiner said that the gunshot wound was in the middle of his forehead, so things weren't adding up, and there was conflicting information coming from a few different sources. Either way, the police ruled his death as self-inflicted, and they didn't plan to reopen the investigation after Michele's trial. But like Greg, Bryn gave no indications that he was planning on ending his own life. He was really happy and was excited to come home to his wife that night after a work trip, so the whole thing just seemed very strange. Bryn's wife, Michele, said, "After he died, I questioned it, and I questioned it and questioned it. I'm not unable to accept that my husband committed suicide. I just never seen any evidence that proves that that's what happened. The more that the police push back and refuse to talk to me or show me any photos of how he died, the more suspicious I get. I was his wife. Don't I have any rights at all?" And she had a point. And after Bryn's death, when it came to getting his affairs in order, Michele, the sister-in-law, Greg's wife, apparently took over. She had police talk to her for everything, not his wife. And during a moment when Bryn's wife was distraught with emotions, Michele had her sign off on him getting cremated, which was just very suspicious. Why would she care whether or not Bryn was cremated? It wasn't even her husband. Sadly, after all of this, Michaela is still left without not only a dad, but now without a mom. And from what I could find, Michaela is now around 14 or 15 years old and lives with a family friend. She's well cared for and is allowed to visit her mom in prison whenever she wants. And the same goes for Greg's other daughter, Taylor. She no longer has her dad to be there for her either. Michele's children no longer appear to have much of a relationship with their mom anymore. And her one son, Andrew, publicly spoke out on Facebook back in 2019, basically saying, like, my mom went on trial, I testified against her, but it was all circumstantial evidence against her, even though I testified against her for what she did. In the end, it was her own mouth that really got her in trouble. She was just constantly changing her story. She was constantly talking to the media during her trial. And it was kind of an interesting statement. I found it pretty interesting because it almost seems like Andrew might not be 100% sure what his mom even did, but rather he was just kind of testifying of what she was trying to get him to do. I don't know. Either way, Michele will probably spend the rest of her life in prison. And it's insane how she went from having everything that she could possibly want or need, the money, the mansion, the good husband, the children, and for reasons that are still pretty confusing, she ended it all and ended up in a prison cell. It's also crazy to think that had she just taken that plea deal and not continued to lie and change her story, then she wouldn't be spending almost the rest of her life in prison, right? In fact, she'd likely be out of prison by now, and she'd be able to reconnect with her children, but she just kept talking, kept changing her story. And for what? Greed? Was this driven by money? Do you think she was responsible for her brother-in-law's death too? And then once she got away with it, that's why she tried to use the same exact technique on her husband? Was it all for the life insurance? Was it because she was having an affair and she was about to get caught because maybe she truly was pregnant? I don't know. There were so many twists in this case that it's difficult to make sense of it. So I'm curious to know what you think was true, not true, the motive, not the motive. What do you think about this case? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of 10 to Life. And until the next one, guys, stay safe. Bye.